This is Celine Dion, and this is my life in looks.
Ladies and gentlemen, Celine Dion.
Celine Dion.
Celine Dion.
From Caesar's Palace, Celine Dion.
For 17 years, Celine Dion carried a secret that had nothing to do with fame, money, or scandal. It lived in the one place a singer fears most, her throat. She hid it from her audiences, from her critics, and for a long time, even from herself. This is the story of what that secret cost her, what it finally forced her to admit, and why, in the middle of an illness with no cure, she is choosing to walk back onto the biggest stages in the world. To understand what she's fighting now, it helps to understand what she built first. Celine Dion was born on March 30th, 1968, in Charlemagne, Quebec, the youngest of 14 children in a family that didn't have much money but never lacked music. Her father played accordion. Her mother turned the household into something close to a performing troupe. By the time Celine was 5, she was already singing for real audiences, not just relatives in a living room. Music wasn't a dream she chased later in life. It was simply the air she grew up breathing. Her break came in an unexpected place. At 19, she represented Switzerland, not Canada, at the Eurovision Song Contest in Dublin, singing in French, and won by a single point. That narrow margin opened a door that would eventually lead to more than 200 million albums sold worldwide, 5 Grammy Awards, and a song, My Heart Will Go On, that became inseparable from an entire generation's memory of Titanic. Behind much of that success stood Renee Angelo, the manager who mortgaged his own home to fund her first record after hearing a demo tape her brother sent him when she was 12. Angelo later became her husband. Their marriage lasted 22 years before he died of throat cancer in January 2016, a loss that quietly shaped much of what came after, including the way Celine talks about what the stage still means to her. Then there was Las Vegas. Her residencies at Caesar's Palace didn't just sell tickets. They changed how the industry thought about long-term residencies as a business model. Her first run, A New Day, became the highest-grossing concert residency in history at the time, and her second run climbed high enough that Dion has held both the first and second spots on Billboard's all-time residency earnings list. By any measure, she had become one of the most dependable forces in live music, which is part of why what came next felt so disorienting to the people who thought they knew her whole story. Because quietly, underneath all of it, something had already started to go wrong. Celine has since said that symptoms had been building for roughly 17 years before she received an actual diagnosis. It began cruelly in her throat, the instrument her entire identity was built around. She described episodes of vocal spasming, moments where her voice would simply stop obeying her. For years, she explained it away as exhaustion, as the physical toll of a punishing schedule. Those explanations weren't unreasonable on their face, but underneath them was a harder possibility she wasn't ready to face yet. The cracks became visible to the public gradually. In October 2021, she postponed the opening of a new Las Vegas residency, citing severe and persistent muscle spasms. No diagnosis was named. A few months later, in January 2022, she canceled the remaining dates of her Courage World Tour for what was again described only as muscle spasms and medical advice. The public had questions. They didn't have answers yet. Those answers came in December 2022, when Celine sat in front of a camera and told the world she had been diagnosed with stiff person syndrome, or SBS, a name most people, understandably, had never heard before. She announced the cancellation of the Courage Tour at the same time. Stiff person syndrome is an extremely rare autoimmune neurological disorder, affecting roughly 1 person in a million. It causes progressive muscle stiffness and spasms severe enough to trigger falls, dislocations, and broken bones in some patients. Doctors at centers like UT Southwestern and Johns Hopkins explain that most patients with SBS carry antibodies to an enzyme called GAD, which the body needs to produce GABA, a neurotransmitter that normally calms nerve activity. When that calming system misfires, the nervous system becomes chronically overexcitable, and muscles can seize with little or no warning. Crucially, physical strain isn't the only trigger. Stress, Sudden noise and strong emotion can set off an episode too, which is a brutal irony for a woman whose entire career runs on the emotional intensity of live performance. There is no cure. Treatment focuses on managing symptoms. Muscle relaxants like diazepam and baclofen to help activate GABA receptors, sometimes at very high doses, and in more severe cases, immunotherapy aimed at reducing the GD antibodies themselves. Celine has spoken about the scale of what it took just to function during her worst stretches, describing daily doses of medication, so high that even walking and swallowing required real effort. She's also described something even harder to hear, that living with the disease made her feel embarrassed. This is a woman who performed for kings, presidents, and stadiums of strangers her entire adult life, and the illness left her feeling ashamed of her own body in front of the people closest to her. In June 2024, Amazon Prime Video released the documentary I Am, Celine Dion, and it became one of the most talked about films of the year, largely because of one unforgettable, unflinching scene. Earlier that day, Celine had been recording music for the film Love Again. Later, during a session with her sports medicine therapist, her body suddenly went into spasm, starting in her hands and feet, then spreading until her whole body locked into crisis. She was fully conscious through the entire episode. Her medical team administered a nasal spray typically reserved for serious emergencies, like cluster seizures, and the episode lasted several minutes while cameras kept rolling. Director Irene Taylor later said it was one of the hardest things she'd ever had to film. She wanted to stop, but Celine had already told her, "Keep the camera on. We'll decide what stays in later." When the editing was finished, Celine chose to leave it in, not for shock value, but because she wanted people living with invisible, misunderstood conditions to feel genuinely seen. In one of the more striking moments in the film, once the seizure passes, it's Celine who ends up comforting the director rather than the other way around. A little over a month later, the world saw an entirely different image of the same body and the same illness. On July 26, 2024, at the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics, Celine Dion appeared on the Eiffel Tower in a white gown, in the rain, and sang Edith Piaf's L'Hymne à l'amour. The song choice wasn't incidental. Piaf wrote it out of devastating loss, and for Celine to sing it in that moment, after everything the world had just learned about her, added weight the audience couldn't have missed. NBC's Kelly Clarkson, calling the ceremony, described her as a vocal athlete, and it's hard to argue with that framing. This was a live, outdoor, unscaled performance from a woman whose own documentary had just shown, in graphic detail, how singing itself could trigger a neurological crisis. There was no safety net. She finished the song without incident and later released a live recording, a quiet but unmistakable signal that she wasn't finished. Then came March 30th, 2026, her 58th birthday. In the weeks before, mysterious posters bearing only song titles, no name or face, began appearing around Paris, and fans who knew her catalog understood immediately what was being teased. On the day itself, standing once again in front of the Eiffel Tower, Celine confirmed what those posters had promised. She would return to the stage with a residency at Paris La Défense Arena, the largest indoor arena in Europe. She called it the best birthday gift of her life. Notably, she didn't claim to be cured, and she didn't pretend the illness was behind her. She said she felt good, that she felt strong, that she was a little nervous, and that above all she felt grateful, language that was honest about both the progress and the uncertainty still ahead of her. 10 shows were announced initially, running from September 12th through October 14th, 2026. The demand that followed stunned even experienced promoters. Nearly 9 million people entered the ticket lottery. 6 additional shows were added, bringing the total to 16. And further dates were later confirmed, extending the residency into May 2027. It was, by any measure, proof that the public hadn't moved on from her. They'd been waiting. None of that changes the underlying reality, though. Stiff person syndrome doesn't pause for ticket sales or good headlines. It was present at the Olympics. It will be present in the arena in September. A single song under tightly controlled conditions is one kind of risk. A full concert, night after night, with the cumulative physical and emotional strain of an extended run, is another kind entirely. Those are fair, serious questions, and they don't take anything away from what she's already accomplished by asking them. What's worth noting, based on the most recent updates from her own accounts, is that Celine herself doesn't sound like someone in crisis. She's been posting periodically on social media, including a Thanksgiving 2025 video encouraging her followers to slow down and be grateful. And in a health update tied to her birthday announcement, she described herself as managing well, singing again, and even doing some dancing. She's also spoken about her recovery as an active, ongoing process. Back in a 2024 BBC interview, she said her voice was being rebuilt, not as some finished achievement, but as work that was already underway. That's a very different story than a sudden decline. It's someone managing a chronic, incurable illness with real discipline, sharing both the hard days and the better ones. There's also a deeply personal thread running underneath all of this. Celine has spoken about how closely performing is tied to the memory of her late husband, René, who died just days before their oldest son's 15th birthday. On stage, she said, she still feels connected to him. That means walking away from music wouldn't actually free her from what she's carrying. The illness stays with her either way, on stage or off. But the stage gives her something the illness can't easily take. A sense of meaning, of connection, of remaining fully herself in the middle of something that keeps trying to chip away at that self. When a reporter once framed her absence from the spotlight in a way that suggested decline or finality, Celine's answer was 2 words: "I'm not dead." It's a blunt, almost startling reply, but it captures something real about her approach to all of this. She isn't interested in letting anyone else write the ending to her story while she's still very much living it. She said, in her own words, that if she can't run, she'll walk, and if she can't walk, she'll crawl. The point was never speed. It was continuing forward. September 12, 2026, at La Défense Arena outside Paris, will be the first full concert Celine Dion has given since March 2020. 45,000 seats, sold out. Whatever happens on that stage, the story that gets her there isn't really about whether she'll be okay. That word is too small for what she's actually navigating. The real story is about a woman who was handed an incurable illness that specifically targets the exact system her entire life's work depends on, who spent 17 years hiding it out of fear and embarrassment, who then chose to show the world her worst moment on camera anyway, and who is now walking back into the brightest lights she knows, fully aware of the risk, because the alternative, disappearing,